Hey, it's Mike. So Religion Dystopia. It's still it is the 12th of January, allegedly 2023. Again, my second attempt to read some more out of Adventures Beyond the Body, starting at page 11, journal entry, March 4th, 2000. Excuse me, did it again. 1972. Anyways, I did it. First time I got all emotional, got all upset with God. And anyways, that's one thing about good about God. You're allowed to be who you are with Him, regardless of what anybody else says. God, that being Heavenly Father, the God of all life. I hope. Anyways, and so this is so this is entry October 4th, 1972. By the way, the book once again is from William Buhlman. I silently repeated an affirmation. Now I am out of my body for 10 to 15 minutes. I wonder why he didn't say 12 minutes. I don't know. Guess he didn't know exactly. As I grew increasingly sleepy, as much as possible, I intensified my affirmations as I drift off to sleep. Almost instantly, I'm awakened by intense vibrations and a electrical like buzzing throughout my body. I am startled and an intense wave of fear surges through me. I calm myself down by repeating, I am protected by the light. My initial fear slowly dissipates as I visualize myself surrounded by a globe of protective light. I think of floating and feel myself lift up and out of my physical body. I feel light as a feather and float slowly upward. As I float away from my body, I realize that the vibrations and buzzing have diminished to a slight humming sensation. Feeling more secure, I open my eyes and find myself staring at the ceiling 2 feet in front of me. I'm about looking at my body. Did I say that right? Did that make sense? I'm surprised that I'm floated that high and instinctively think about looking at my body on the bed. Instantly, I snap back to my physical body and feel a strange vibration as my physical sensations quickly return. As I lie in bed reviewing the experience, I realize that my thoughts directed towards my physical body must have snapped me back. I know it's possible to view my physical body because during my first out-of-body experience, I distinctly saw it. I suspect the key to observing our physical bodies is to remain as mentally and emotionally detached as possible. This is a very interesting statement right here that's probably worth talking a little bit about. To be mentally and emotionally detached. What do I have to say about that? I did have something to say about that. Yeah, isn't that an interesting thing that when we think about how our emotions and our thoughts, I don't know that they guide us through our lives, but if it's possible that Robert Monroe is right about the Loosh factor, and that we are basically individual Loosh factories producing this Loosh in which the ethereal realm, the spiritual realm, and all the different many dimensions that are around us feed off us. Is it possible, and I'm just making this an observation and not a claim, a fact, but is it possible that our mental state and our emotional state is what actually keeps, or is a contributing factor of keeping our spirits within the physical avatar? And that was all my personal comments there. So, but more important, we must keep our thoughts directed away from our physical bodies. The slightest thought focused on the body will immediately snap us back to it. In retrospect, I should have a thought about turning over as I floated. Then I could have observed my physical body without any thoughts being focused on it. And isn't it, if this possible, and I just did a impromptu video about this connection with the physical body of the tree, and how a lot of these entities that dwell within the tree, when they come out and say it's like this, okay, very similar situation going on, right? Many times they see that they are observed by us, and you'll see like a quote unquote Bigfoot or Sasquatch or Dogman, alien or whatever, and they'll like be peeking around a tree, or they'll be around a tree or close to the forest, and they'll immediately just go right back into the forest and disappear, like they're going and being absorbed back into the trees. And which is interesting, if my supposition, how I see things, is correct, that we're dealing with something ethereal, spiritual, and interdimensional, and not something that's strictly a physical being, what we call Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Dogman. It would make sense too why they would be not so concerned about it when they walk out in front of us on the highway or on the road, right? Now, I've heard stories and even I've talked to several people who said that Bigfoot's been ran over or whatever. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe when it's totally detached from the tree or the earth, that it has the capacity of being actually gone for, and if the conditions are right, which makes me think about the Patterson film. You know, MK Davis, who I love a lot, right? MK Ultra. I mean, I brought that up before, and it's still quite a coincidence, to say the least. Most likely is a coincidence, or it could be the spiritual realm in its own cynical way of playing on us. What did they actually do? If it was an actual entity, Sasquatch did, it was manifest fully in the physical realm, and now it's walking in this meat suit, which I don't even know if it's meat, beyond at this point. If it's coming out of the trees, and we hear stuff like numerous reports coming out that when they do DNA of, say, aliens or Bigfoot, that they find that there's something like similar to vegetation. There's a cellular structure of these trees. Is that part of what they need in order to manifest physically? It's just a question. I don't know for sure, but it seems like it's high probability that is actually what happens. It draws the essence of or the life force of these trees out of it in order to have this manifestation, right? It is not all that strange of a thing if you realize that the attempts that have been made throughout history of the shamans, the priestcraft, to have these things manifest in the flesh, and which such things as the requirement for sacrifice of one form or another. You can think of human sacrifice, and you can think of the Aztecs, and you can think about the blatant images that are coming out of Catholicism and others of the heart, and blood, and that blood constantly is made of not plasma but water, the necessity to spill blood. I mean, when you look at the pools in the Patterson film where there was blood, it looks very bloody pools. To me, it looks that way, and I brought it up to MK. He kind of skirts around it, doesn't really want to talk too much about it. He does admit that there's something much more going on there than they admit. I honestly think the reason why they revealed the footage, and it's not simply because it's California. California has Sasquatches because these things are everywhere. But if you see the number of trees, large trees, where it was filmed, down trees, dead trees, the bloody water, bloody, at least they're blood red looking water liquid pools. Hollywood's just down the road. Literally, I mean, it's in the same state. Laurel Canyon and its studios, the same studios that were responsible for a lot of government propaganda. We look at the fact that there were many cults in that area, including allegedly, Anton LaVey's, supposed new church in San Francisco, which is a couple hours away from where it was filmed, which is just in California. If anybody's lived, especially in the northern part of California, or if you live out in the country, say you live in areas of the country where it's not so densely populated, it's no big deal. It's quite normal to drive hours to a destination. You get used to it. It's not that big of a deal to you. God knows who else was actually there that day and what actually happened. Also, the argument about the fact that in 2000 or 1967 they didn't have the technology to create a suit to mimic Bigfoot is bogus. It's erroneous. They did have that technology. They were able to, fake the moon landing, so I'm sure they could have done the same thing. It brings up a whole lot of questions, doesn't it? But you might be asking also, why am I talking about Bigfoot while we're talking about out-of-body experiences? Well, once again, if these are spiritual entities, in order for them to manifest into just like people would happen when they have out-of-body experiences, their spirit is going from this physical dimension into a different dimension, what we call a spiritual dimension. If they don't even know if that's even proper, we'll find out as time goes on. It's even proper to say that. So the reverse or something very similar could be necessary for something, say a large spiritual being that's living in these large pine trees in Northern California, right? That in order to it go from the spiritual realm infested in the tree to manifest in the physical realm, something a reversal process might be needed, or some simpler process might be needed. One thing is for sure, none of us, if they're by now, it's now 2022. There would be, knowing how humans are, there would be a Bigfoot in a zoo, and if that was the case, then there would be whole parts of the country that say this is reserved strictly for quote unquote Bigfoot, right? Or maybe not. Maybe people would be so frightened by the fact of having such an entity, But regardless of all the questions that may be raised from a physical flesh and blood entity, the fact of the matter is these things have been reported for millennia in all parts of the world, and my gosh, everywhere you go, where people start thinking about these things, and focusing on these things that people start having these sightings, one way or the other. I do, from you look at the tree structures and everything else, you see that it's necessary for the life force to be drawn out, the essence of these trees to be drawn out, not have manifestations. Now, at the same token, if you think about human beings and their outer body experiences, and one thing that's not, we will probably not hear in this book is what toll it takes on the body, because regardless, where energy transfers, there's loss of energy. So how many times you take an out-of-body experiences until at some point it affects you spiritually or physically or both? Does it strengthen it or does it weaken it? It's an important question. Do I know? I don't know. I just know that I've had out-of-body experiences and didn't even realize it as a child. And that I know a lot of people want to do it and want to have so they can interact with the astral plane and the ethereal plane. I know that if we look at the scriptures, we can talk about the book of Revelation, and John, he had a vision, right? And people think, well, he just had a dream. No, he didn't just have a dream. He had an out-of-body experience. It's clear that's what he had. And it's probably pretty clear that Daniel had something similar to it. All right, we look at also Paul, and he's talking about in 2 Corinthians about having, out-of-body experience. We want to call it a dream or whatever, but it's the same thing that's happening here. If it's a real out-of-body experience, and if your soul is energy, then there's a loss of energy during the process of out-of-body experience, and certainly there should be some kind of measurable or recognizable, determinable, some form of loss of energy or essence of yourself. But I shouldn't say certainly, because that could be absolutely wrong. I don't know. I'm now just in this part of my life, my journey, inquire. After realizing how wicked this whole place is, how everything's nothing but lies, how bad we've been lied in every freaking walk of our life, and from every institution in this whole plane of existence is based on lies and deception. I am now looking into this whole thing about the out-of-body experience, not because I'm promoting it, because I'm trying to understand it, and I think this is something that's worth looking into. And I feel that maybe this simpleton of a man, Michael Adams, might have something to contribute to it, coming from a different perspective. I have a bit of a scientific background in education, in college and university, in environmental science and management. I have a small bit of understanding of electricity, but I wouldn't have to say I'm all close to being an expert in any of this. But I think I have a bit of a perspective, plus the fact that of my intensive studies of the Bible in the past 6 years, which I don't recommend you doing unless you have how do I say this? I think it's good to read the Bible, and you can read it out loud, and you have to understand the magical part of the Bible. And it is not about being proficient in eisegesis or textual variants, or just cherry picking of verses to convince yourself and the rest of the world of your theology or your sect of Christianity and its truth. There's hidden truths in that. It's also a brilliant form of mind control, and not only of yourself but the things around you. Now, what I've said, I know for a lot of people is hard to stomach, but it only comes from wisdom and experience. And somebody who has no interest in being part of religion again, but just only wants to know the truth. Who would also like to, not spend his eternity coming back to this place and having all this pain and suffering. I've had enough of all the lies, deceptions. I really have, and I've had enough of the oppressive nature of this existence. I just have enough. And if what I see clearly is happening is that, as they are closing the or the noose around everyone's neck here, symbolically through artificial intelligence, Wi-Fi, central bank digital currency, your bio passport and everything else. It's going to be. It was bad. I don't know. All I can say is, I'm 55 years old, and I understand older people that I dealt with growing up, and they said that their childhood was better than my childhood. And I can say honestly to my son that my childhood is better than his childhood. And what's the difference? The difference is, although we didn't have the ability that we have today to have this kind of global reach of communications, we have. My life is more isolated than it ever was as a child. And that was a tough gig as it was for me. So, anyways, see, here's my problem of reading this book. It keeps me thinking about stuff outside of it. So, that's why I recommend you get the book yourself and read it, if that's what you want to hear it. If not, that's part of the gig on YouTube, is when you read stuff, commentary is an important part of it, right? Copyright reasons was one reason. But even more importantly is, why am I reading this book? Journal entry, October 12, 1972. I got that one right. I wake up at 3:15 in the bewitching hour. After 3.5 hours of sleep, there's that 33 again, 3.5 hours. 2 REM periods. Move to the sofa in the living room, and after about 40 minutes of reading, I become sleepy and begin to do a difficult visualization. I picture myself on a bright orange balloon filling with helium. I can feel myself becoming lighter and lighter as the balloon expands. I intensify and hold my visualization as long as possible. Drifting off to sleep, I awaken to the sensation of intense vibrations and buzzing throughout my body. I recognize that I am ready to separate and immediately think about floating. The vibrations and sounds rapidly diminish as I separate and float up to the ceiling. Out of the instinct, I reach out my arms to touch the ceiling, but instead of touching, my hands slowly enter the tingling vibrational substance of the ceiling. I can feel a slight resistance as my hands and arms move through the ceiling. Moving slowly upward, my body enters and passes through the insulation rafters and attic. And intense excitement flows through me as I pass through the roof and float at the top of the house. At the top of the house, yeah. I think of standing, and I am instantly upright, standing at the highest peak of the house. As I look around, I can clearly see the TV antenna in the chimney. Even though it's in the middle of the night, the sky and everything around me are partially lit by a luminous silvery glow. Kind of reminds me of the light pollution that I see when I go outside at night myself. Standing at the top of the house, I have a sudden urge to fly. I spread my arms and glide down from the roof and fly over my backyard. I slowly descend until I'm floating about 4 feet above the ground. For some reason, I feel as if I'm getting heavier and continue descending and until I'm just inches above the grass. I think control, but it's too late. With a thud, I crash face first onto the lawn. At that instant, I'm back in my physical body. My physical sensations return, and I wonder why I lost control. Why did I become so heavy? Journal entry, November 2, 1972. I awaken to the sound and sensations of intense buzzing. It feels as if my body and mind are vibrating apart. At first, I'm startled by the intensity of the vibrations, but slowly I calm myself and focus my full attention on the idea of floating away from my physical body. And in seconds, I float up and out of my body and hover several feet above it. I notice that the buzzing noise and vibrations immediately subside after a complete separation. The sound and vibrations are replaced by a serene feeling of calm. It feels as if I'm weightless and floating like a cloud. I think of moving to the door and I seem to automatically float to that destination. I feel an overwhelming sense of freedom I've never known before. Spontaneously, I decide to fly and I think about flying through the roof. Instantly, I fly straight up through the ceiling and pass through the roof like a rocket. I'm thrilled by the response and begin to understand that my thoughts are the energy of my personal propulsion. I spread my arms and level off several hundred feet in the air. Below me, I can clearly see the buildings and the roads of my neighborhood. I feel a slight tugging sensation as I fly higher and higher over the city of Baltimore. The tugging sensation increases and I think of my body and instantly I'm snapped back to my body. My physical body is numb and tingling as I open my eyes. As my out-of-body experiences continue, I became fascinated with the non-physical energy structures I observed. With each experience, my questions seemed to grow until I became obsessed, of course, with trying to understand the nature of the non-physical forms that I had encountered. In an attempt to comprehend the relationship between the physical and non-physical environments, I developed a series of crude experiments. For example, every day I would balance a pencil or a pen on the very edge of my nightstand. My purpose was to see if I could somehow move the physical object with my non-physical body. I quickly discovered that this simple experiment was more difficult than it appeared. My biggest obstacle was attempting to focus on my experiment. At the moment of separation, my mind would race with unlimited possibilities, and my experiment seemed intense and insignificant compared with the many wonders that were available. Each experience increased my realization that my non-physical state of consciousness was extremely sensitive and responsive to the slightest thought. My prevailing conscious and subconscious thoughts would instantly propel me in a specific direction. I quickly learned that my subconscious mind exerts much more influence and control over my actions than I ever imagined. Often, a completely spontaneous thought would create an immediate reaction. For example, if I thought about flying, which I often did, I would immediately fly through the ceiling and wall and glide over my neighborhood. Gradually, I realized that gaining full conscious control during the first seconds after separation was absolutely essential. To accomplish this, I experimented with different ways to gain control. At first, I tried focusing my full attention on my body or arm just after separation. I hoped that this would concentrate my thoughts on a single idea and give me the immediate control that I was seeking. This created a strange sensation of being immersed within myself. Though exhilarating, the end result was not control, but a feeling of being mesmerized and then drawn into a sparkling universe of brilliant blue stars. Well, that sounds a bit dangerous, be mesmerized for one. I think it would be very dangerous to get yourself in a lot of trouble. I wonder if that's how they capture our souls and our spirits in the first place and send us down here by mesmerizing us. Unhappy with the results, I decided to try grabbing my non-physical arm and focusing on the sensations of my grip. I was somewhat surprised to discover that the feel of my non-physical arm was amazingly solid. My non-physical body possessed an inherent vibrational quality. It felt completely solid, but I could feel the mild vibrational energy of my arm's substance. I quickly discovered that my energy body was indeed real in every respect, appearing to be an exact duplicate of my physical body. And that's important, where he said appearing. That doesn't mean it's so. It says it's appearing. This might be part of the tricks of this matrix that we live in. I also found that when my thoughts were focused on my non-physical body, I began to feel myself drawn inward, as if I were being pulled into a vacuum deep inside myself, which is very... Think about what he's saying there. A possibility, as above, so below, as outside, so within. I guess what we're trying to say is there a possibility that what we're actually experiencing, or what he's experiencing, and when we talk about outer body experiences, that is a lot more complicated than what people are trying to present it to be. Over a period of several months, I repeated the process of self-examination, and through trial and error, I learned about my non-physical body. With repeated observations, I began to realize that my non-physical form was like an energy mold, in effect, conscious energy that had assumed a temporary form. I think what he's saying there, conscious energy that had assumed a temporary form. Now let's take this back to what my argument is about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, because if we're talking about a spiritual being, although they don't look like us, they're spiritual beings like we are, and them coming out of the tree, like I say, and using the essence of the trees and the elements. I lost focus. I knew that I needed another method of gaining conscious control. I recognized that focusing on my physical body created a strong tendency for me to draw inward to areas I could not begin to comprehend. Okay, with repeated observation, I began to realize that my non-physical form was like an energy mold, in effect, conscious energy that had assumed a temporary form. So yeah, so here we go again. Conscious energy that had assumed a temporary form. People see Bigfoot out in the forest in the woods. It's that conscious energy that has assumed a temporary form. That's what I'm trying to get at, but I lost total focus. After almost a year, I was becoming frustrated by numerous failed attempts to gain full control when I finally discovered that I was making this entire process more involved than it needed to be. During an afternoon of out-of-body experience, I spontaneously shouted, "Control now!" Immediately I felt an enhancement of my analytical mind. So he shouted, "Control now." As I stood by the foot of my bed, my vision improved but remained slightly out of focus. So I shouted, "Clarity now." My vision instantly snapped into focus. I felt the rush of energy and awareness flow through my body and mind. I was thrilled. For the first time, I felt in complete control. My entire self-awareness was present, and I actually felt more aware than in my normal physical state of consciousness. My thoughts were crystal clear and vibrantly alive. I suddenly realized that the key to control was simply to demand full conscious control immediately after separation. I also began to understand the importance of focusing my thoughts and the need to be extremely specific when making requests. I think I'll suck at this. On one occasion, just after separation, I said aloud, "I request full waking consciousness," and immediately snapped back into my physical body. I found that the controlling portion of my mind takes my thoughts literally. My poor choice of word, awakening, was immediately interpreted to mean physical waking. Didn't really. After several months of experimenting with different phrases, I began to recognize that I had unintentionally programmed myself to think control, in quotes, during each out-of-body experience. I soon discovered myself doing it automatically. As I floated up and away from my body, after a year of trial and error, I knew I was finally on the right track. Throughout this period, I continued my pencil experiment. During several out-of-body experiences, I tried to move the pencil balanced on this nightstand and was surprised to find that the vibrational frequency, or in brackets density, of my non-physical body seemed to determine whether the pencil or even the entire room was visible to me. So this is a very important thing about visible vibrational frequency or density. Visible, did I say visual? Vibrational frequency or density, that's what I meant to say, a visual. Vibrational frequency density. Slowly I came to understand that the environment I was observing was not the physical world, as I had assumed. I realized that the structures I normally observed when out of body were non-physical structures. Gradually, it all started to fit together. Now I finally understood why there was slight vibrations between the non-physical and the physical furniture and other objects. For example, non-physical walls were often a different color, and the shapes and styles of some of the furniture and rugs were different. Much of this was minor, but nevertheless noticeable. For me to be able to see my normal physical surroundings, my internal vibrational rate had to be relatively dense or low. I also noticed that the very act of requesting consciousness and clarity seemed to automatically increase the internal frequency of my non-physical body. I'm going to read this paragraph again. For me, the ability to see my normal physical surroundings, my internal vibrational rate had to be relatively dense or slow. I clearly seem to automatically increase the internal frequency of my physical body. And an effort to make my experiment more realistic, I balanced pencils at 3 different areas that I normally pass upon leaving my body. My hope was that I would notice the pencils at the side of my bed or at the front or the foot of my bed as I moved past them. Looking back, I realized that it probably looked a little strange. On one occasion, I remember my mother asking me, "What's with the pencils?" Just imagine trying to explain this to your mother without sounding like a nut. After several weeks, I finally focused on one of the pencils after separation. As I moved to the side of the bed, I concentrated on the pencil on the edge of my dresser. At first, my vision seemed foggy, somehow out of sync, so I said aloud, "Clarity now." Instantly, my vision snapped in focus. I could clearly see the pencil in front of me. However, it appeared like a three-dimensional hazy form with substance. I moved closer, touched it with my hand, and felt a slight vibrational sensation as my finger passed through the substance of the pencil. Somewhat frustrated, I tried again, but experienced the same results. Focusing my attention, I realized that my non-physical body was obviously less dense than the pencil, and spontaneously said aloud, "I need to be denser." With a jolt, I shot back into my physical body. As my physical sensations returned, I couldn't help but laugh. I had received my request. I had to remember that requests made when out of body are taken literally. There seems to be little room for interpretation or shades of gray. I would have to remember to be extremely specific with each request. Maybe something like, "I wish to move this pencil," would have been more effective. In a related experience, some years later, I was practicing self-hypnosis with a single lighted candle. After separation, I stood by the candle and decided to blow it out. To my surprise, it went out immediately. Upon returning to my physical body, I opened my eyes to find that the physical candle was still burning. After some thought, I realized that I must have blown out a candle in what I now knew as a parallel dimension closest to the physical. This dimension is a relatively dense energy duplicate of the physical world. This simple experiment is important because it provides evidence that the environments and objects encountered during outer body experiences exist independently of the physical universe. It appears that we are not observing the physical body from a different perspective, as many believe, but are interacting in a separate but parallel dimension of energy. Journal entry June 21, 1973. So we're jump a year later, from 72 to 73. I wake up at 5 a.m. and move to the sofa. After reading for about 5 minutes, I become sleepy and decide to try something new. I grab a new sheet of paper and begin to write out-of-body affirmations. Now I am out of body. As I write, I verbally repeat them to myself. After writing 50 or so, I can barely keep my eyes open. As I drift to sleep, I continue the affirmations in my mind. I'm startled awake by a strange numbness and vibration throughout my body. I stay as calm as possible and focus on the sensations of floating upward. After several seconds, I feel myself lift up and out of my body, and I stand beside my body and walk to the window. I feel somehow out of focus and request clarity. There is only a small improvement, so I repeat my request, and this time I'm not so demanding. This time I'm more demanding. Where did I get that? I need clarity now. Instantly, my awareness became crystal clear. My body feels lighter and more energized. I feel vibrantly awake and aware and decide to try to fly. Stretching out my arms, I take a small leap and fly through the ceiling of the roof until I'm several hundred feet above my neighborhood. I rotate my arm slightly and level off. It's absolutely exhilarating. I feel completely free as I glide over the town of Catonsville, I guess what it is. Even though it's night, the landscape is illuminated by a silvery glow. Below me, the houses and streets appear like a Christmas garden. Suddenly, I feel the tugging sensation of my back and spontaneously think of my body. The thought of my body snaps me back to it with a jolt. I awaken with the slight numbness and tingling throughout my body. To me, it's interesting. I imagine it's not interesting to anybody that hears this from me reading it, but I'm going to put it out there anyway, because that's all part of I believe how the universe works. Regardless of the fact that AI and the Internet of Things and the spirit realm was going to, will end up using this against me. It's the catch-22. It's part of this whole I didn't want that. I wanted to delete that. It's all part of this multi-dimensional, dualistic, trilistic, multilistic universe reality, you know what I mean? And one of the things I've learned is you have to read out loud and you have to speak out loud. If you have no one to speak to, there's no group, there's no one to be your sounding board, then let this be the sounding board. The scrying mirror called the internet. I mean, there's, a lot of people say, what are you doing? What are you talking about? And I'm like, well, are you setting up a trap for yourself? And I'm like, most likely. But all things are this way, by the way. A trap. It's one dilemma after another, one snare after another. But I guess it's facing your demons one way or the other. So Even if it's just, most things in life is just imaginary make believe. So I'm just make believe that there are. Actually, I don't even think about it. I just make believe there's one person out there. I don't visualize hundreds of people or thousands of people on YouTube or listening to me. I just visualize one person out there listening to me. Or, in other words, I pretend. and it turns out that there's more than one. Not much more, but more than one. So, those of you are listening to me, thank you so much. Don't deserve it, that's for sure. But then again, I never tried to be a YouTuber or a internet personality. I'm doing this, and the reason I've been doing this and doing things live for a decade now, almost on and off over a decade, is because I know that this forces a man to grow. And speaking out loud is a very important thing. Now, some people, they do it through writing, but I'm not ready to write a book. Everyone thinks, well, there's a book to write. Is there a book to write, really? Does the world need another of the billions of books? Maybe if I do write a book, it would be a book that actually has something that's not just conjecture, not just opinion. But then maybe not. It's a high standard for myself. I think I'm going to take a little break. How far am I into this? Yeah, it's a good place to stop. Where am I at? Yeah, it's a good place to stop. Although it should get good. Claudia, if you heard that recording of the conversation I had with Claudia, she talked about this, like a guy, and she saw somebody in a blue robe, and we'll hear at least a couple times in this one chapter of William or Bill Buhlman having the same experience on the other side as seeing a man in blue or purple. I think it's purple is what there was in both. So purple, and the meaning of that is something that's I'm sure there's something very deep meaning behind it. What that is fully, I'm not sure. I know that someone mentioned about authority, and I know that many of the different priests. I gotta look into it. That's what I should do instead of assuming. So, anyways, I'm gonna cut it short here. End it. Anyways, thank you.
You're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you are going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.
Take it slow. Are you searching?